Good evening, everybody. We're about to start the meeting, so if you'd like to take your seats. We are broadcasting live on YouTube, as you can see on the little note at the bottom of the screen there, and the video will be available on YouTube afterwards as well, although that might take a while. Mm-hmm. Very grateful to Caroline for coming along to chair the proceedings tonight, and she's going to give an introductory talk, and that will then be followed by the individual speakers. And then just at about 8:30, we should be moving on to the question and answer session, which Caroline's going to host as well. So over to you, Caroline. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin, and a very, very warm welcome to all the folks in the room. It's lovely to see you on this beautiful, beautiful evening. And welcome to everyone who's watching online. I'm sure there's millions of people tuned in. My husband decided to do the gardening instead. What can I say? All right. So tonight we're going to hear, I hope, some of the detail about the council's plans for the future of the city, and particularly moving around in the city. And they're inviting us, or we're inviting you, to imagine what it might be like to live in a city where you don't need a car to get around. And before we get into some of the detail of that, I just wanted to kind of set the scene for tonight's conversation. And exactly a week ago, the World Meteorological Organization warned us in their new report about new record temperatures coming in the next 5 years, and a very strong likelihood that we will move through the 1.5 degrees of warming agreed at the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. The challenge of climate is real, and it's very urgent. We don't really need reminding about that, but it's easy to forget the scale of the problem. Now, of course, the Scottish Government has its own very ambitious policy targets, which have been in place for some time. And moving those targets into action, we've seen in the last year or so the publication of several key pieces of policy, including the route map on reduction of car kilometres, that headline target of reducing car kilometres by 20% against a 29 baseline by the year 2030. So that's a Scottish national target. And just a few weeks ago, the Scottish Government published, approved by the Scottish Parliament, the National Planning Framework number 4. And this is now a statutory piece of policy which is to be used in weighing all planning decisions. And policy number 1 in NPF 4 refers to the climate and the nature emergency. And it says that significant weight should be given to the climate and the nature emergency in all decisions. So at the national level, we have some ambitious targets, but of course the challenge is in implementation and turning those fine words into some actions on the ground that help us all to change the way we live, change the way we move, and achieve these ambitious targets. So this is where the council and the work that they've been doing fits in, the translation of those high-level policy targets and goals, addressing that big issue, climate change, carbon reduction, emissions reduction. So we've seen the publication of the City Mobility Plan and now the draft action plans that sit alongside that. And we're going to see, I hope, some of the detail today. There are a number of strategies, and it's easy to be overwhelmed by the variety of policies that are on the table. An active travel action plan, a parking action plan, a road safety action plan, an air quality action plan, a circulation plan. Have I missed one? Public transport, thank you, Phil. Okay. But these are the critical link between the policy and the implementation, the action on the ground. So, before I hand over to our transport convener and his officer, I'm going to leave you with one further thought. Time is very tight. 2030 is 7 years away. And the council's target is a 30% reduction in car kilometres. So we have to ask some hard questions about how quickly we can do this. So change is needed really quickly in order to meet those targets. Okay, so we're all going to focus on that, aren't we? Okay. In which case, I'm now going to hand over to Councillor Scott Arthur, who's the Transport Convener, and Phil Noble, who is the Strategy Manager for Active Travel. And Phil and Scott are going to be doing a little bit of a tag team presentation. Okay? I'll be back later.
Okay, sorry about that. So I'm Scott Arthur. I'm the interim transport convener here, transport and environment convener here in Edinburgh, and Phil Noble is one of the council officers who works in this domain, and he's along, and I'll talk more about the general drifts, or maybe the wrong word, direction of travel in transport, and Phil will talk about active travel specifically. So we'll talk a bit about what we've achieved so far and what we want to achieve in the coming years, up to 2030, or perhaps just up to the end of this administration. But I think the number one thing I think we've achieved in the last year is we've now got a much better working relationship within the Transport Committee, and also I think connecting between the Council and the public in terms of taking forward this agenda. And so those are 10 things, you can say 10 random things, or the 10 most important things, depending on your perspective, that we've achieved over the last year by working together and working with communities right across the city. Some small things and some big things. So the thing that you're most interested in is number 6, so the public and active travel plans. These are out for consultation just now, and if you've not taken part in that consultation yet, I would encourage you to do so. So if you don't mind, I'll ask a question. So last year I was here and we talked about what we're going to do in the coming year. Did anybody think that we'd be sitting here a year later with £1 billion worth of active travel plans out for consultation? Did anybody think that? Phil, did you think that? So things are moving along. Obviously, we've not got that £1 billion, but we've got the plans and we've got the ambition to meet that. And the other good stuff that's happening that you may or may not be interested in is number 7. We've got 2 LTNs being deployed, on an experimental basis, and we're consulting on 3 20-minute neighbourhoods right now. And one of the right now, you only have to look at CC Well. I mean, I think it goes back probably more than a decade to when that started, and now we're only seeing it on the ground. So there's a lot of uncertainty in transport still. We've got the pandemic. We're still really trying to understand how travel patterns have changed because of that, and we had a meeting today to talk about the junction at Sir Harry Lauder Road, and the unpredictability of travel patterns is a big part of the uncertainty which underpins some of the design decisions there. We're a growing city. Before Christmas time, we set aside land for another 39,000 homes in Edinburgh. A lot of people, and those people are going to want to travel. We're an eco city, depending on your income level, depending on your mobility, and also depending on where you are, where you live in Edinburgh, your experience of the transport system is really different. So if you live in rural West Edinburgh, you get really annoyed when people talk about Edinburgh having the best bus service in the UK, because your bus service there is absolutely awful and needs to improve, and we're working with McGill's on that. We've got to deal with economic shocks. So obviously we've had Brexit, we've had the pandemic, and also the war in Ukraine. We have to think about these things and the impact that's having on the economy. And also, we have to try to attract investment to the city. So when I speak to developers that want to come into the city, who want to invest here, want to create jobs here, transport is something they're interested in. Not just transport connections to their development, but how is transport going to work? Because what they don't want to do is spend tens of millions of pounds on an office development, only for their staff to get to work exhausted because they've been stuck in traffic jams getting there. So all these things connect together. And of course, congestion is a big issue in Edinburgh. Depending on which survey you pick, we're normally in the top 10. This is the TomTom one, which puts us as the most congested city in the UK. And that impacts on our well-being and it impacts on our economy. But it's not all bad. We've got a fantastic public transport network, best in Scotland, second best in the UK, I think 5th best in Europe and 13th in the world. So there's a strong base there to build on, and there's lots to be proud of. And actually tomorrow we'll announce the go live date for Trams to Newhaven, so that people will be able to, if you're between 22 and 60, you'll be able to pay money to get on the tram. Everybody else gets to go for free, of course. So challenges, so the combined challenges, what I'm referring to there, as Caroline's already explained, we've got to hit our net zero targets, really ambitious net zero targets. We've got to deal with congestion, because that's a massive issue in the city, and I've also got the objective to deal with of cutting vehicle kilometres in the city by 30%. So when I talk about combined challenges, that's what I'm talking about. As an administration and as a committee, we have to get the balance right between getting the basics right and showing ambition. So when I go along to community meetings to listen to people, to listen to their concerns, they don't want to talk about transport strategies. They don't want to talk about that until we've talked about why the roads are in such bad conditions, why street cleanliness isn't where it should be. So getting people's trust on these key everyday issues in terms of transport, obviously road condition, footpath condition, gives us the right to be heard on these other things. So we have to have a strategy in place to deal with road and footpath conditions. And let's be honest, it's pretty awful in the city, no matter how you travel around. So we have to deal with that, and we've got funding in place just now, and as well as showing ambition about these bigger projects. So we'll have to do both. And of course, the funding streams for both are different, so it's often not the case that they're competing for funding. We have to get Edinburgh ready for the future, so growth, net zero, all the rest of it. 5-dimensional party politics. So on the Transport Committee, 5 parties, 4 of us has 2 councillors, 1 has 3. So it's about working together and trying to get things done together. So to get something across the line, I have to work with at least 2 other parties to do that. And going back to where it started, I think the partnership working in the committee is working really well. It's a shame nobody from the committee is here tonight, actually, to either agree or disagree with what I'm saying. But it's working really well, and we are getting stuff across the line, which is good. And normally improved with inputs of other councillors on the committee. Chronic underfunding. So what I mean by that is not this year being a bad settlement for us, but there haven't been year after year after year of bad settlements for local government in Scotland. And that has an impact. And whenever this comes up at the committee quite a lot, if you're the kind of person who watches the Transport Committee, and it comes up every time I speak to officers, the biggest challenge we face is lack of resources, staffing, and money to actually deliver projects. So when we're speaking about Sahari Lauder Road today, staffing's had an impact on that. In my ward, I've got a road which goes past the school. It doesn't go right past the school, it goes very near to a school. Been waiting for over 2 years to get the speed limit reduced there. So it was agreed 2.5 years ago the limit's going to get reduced for kids going to school. It's not happened yet, and that's about staff resources. Okay, so that's the impact of chronic underfunding. And the other thing is about the notion that change is painful. And really what I mean there is that if you look at the scale of the ambition we've got for both active and public transport, you're probably looking at over the next 10 years, well over £2 billion worth of investment. And so there is a question which is, well, how do we do this without just bringing the whole city to a halt? And I've learned a lot from the way that the works have been managed on North Bridge, the impact it's had on traders there, and also the way the works have been managed on CC Well about the impacts on traders there. And I think as a council, all 63 of us are committed to learn from that. So we go forward delivering these projects. There's economic benefits at the end for businesses along these routes, but we have to make sure that the businesses make it to the end of these projects and are able to benefit from these projects. And I think there's a lot. It was a gold-plated system in Leith Walk in the trams to Newhaven in terms of the funding that was available. So that can't really be repeated. But I do think we can work with businesses better along the routes so they become partners in these projects rather than opponents. So I'll hand over to Phil just after 3 slides. But I just want to talk about 3 projects that are happening just now in the city. And again, these go back a long time. I mean, we're speaking about George Street down at Parliament a few weeks ago, and one of the MSPs there was a councillor back in 2006, and he said his maiden speech in 2006 was about the George Street project. You know, so here we are all these years later, and we've not really started work on it yet, but it's happening. It's going to start soon. So superficially, people like to think of it as pedestrianising the street. So think about a transport project. But for me, a lot of it is about economic development. So it's about George Street being a little bit under stress because of the new St James's Quarter, particularly the West End. The work we'll do here, in partnership with the businesses, will deliver economic benefits. And we're not ashamed as an administration to say that we support businesses, particularly businesses that aspire to better pay, better conditions. And likewise, we're not ashamed to say we support the tourism economy, as well, as long as it's part of bringing better pay, better conditions to that sector. I could talk about things I don't like about the tourism economy, but let's talk about the positives. That's maybe a question, actually, for later. What issues do I have? But this is absolute economic development. But then when Phil's seen this slide, I just had transport and economic development at the bottom. Phil added quality of life, and of course he's right, because this is going to really be a transformational project. And this is still evolving all the time. So if you watch the committee, you'll see that one of the councillors, Sanadra Stradauni, she's raised a lot of questions about the accessibility, and we've had really good workshops to take forward some of the issues around accessibility on the street, which has been really positive to see, actually, that how we can work together with the retailers and the other stakeholders on this project. Absolutely transformative. And of course, it will be transformative because just now it's dominated by parked cars. Elsewhere in the city, floating car park spaces are quite controversial, but in George Street, they're excited. But why this project is so important for the city is the legacy of the first tram scheme and how that didn't work. The public inquiry is going to be published quite soon. Let's hope that our project goes live before the inquiry is published. Why this is important is because delivering this project on time and on budget, despite Brexit, despite COVID, despite the war in Ukraine, I think tells the Scottish Government and also our colleagues in Sustrans that we can be trusted to deliver these. But I have spent some time going along it, and what I like about it is the quality of the design compared to what we've got elsewhere in the city. So there is issues. It's not perfect, but in terms of the quality of the design, I want this to be the exemplar for what we're doing going forward as a city. And about getting it right, about doing something that brings value to communities, and people living along the route see it as an asset rather than something they've got to deal with every day. So really positive. So I'm going to pause slightly, and then Phil, we're going to segue from active travel, and Phil's going to talk about the circulation plan, and then I'll come back. Phil.
Thank you, Councillor Arthur. So, I'm going to talk briefly about the... Oh, thank you, that could be handy. I'm going to talk briefly about the Active Travel Action Plan first, and then before we move on to the network element of the Active Travel Plan, just say a little bit about what else is in it. And it's about not just about cycling, but within the cycling part of it, it's about not just about the network, but it's about bike parking, it's about marketing and promotion. It's also, in an increased way from the previous plan, it's about walking. There's a stronger emphasis on walking and wheeling. Coming back to the network and to the cycle network, the new plan puts significantly more emphasis on segregating cycling on main roads. This, however, is where the circulation plan comes in, because, as we all know, there's considerable competition for space on main roads. And the circulation plan seeks to address at the same time, and that is a fundamental problem. And traditionally, here as elsewhere, there have been policies and we set out policies and priorities. We and other councils around the country, around the world, set out policies and priorities for different means of transport. But there isn't typically an attempt to actually resolve these at a strategic level or to resolve them at a network level, to map who gets priority where, and to try to set that out in a more strategic way. And that is essentially what Circulation Plan is about. And what we're doing with this plan is we're learning from places like the good examples around the world, and notable ones are Amsterdam and Auckland, who've both adopted this kind of approach to trying to manage their road network. And it's about looking at streets in an integrated way and trying to also to integrate infrastructure delivery. So too often projects, again, not just in Edinburgh, maybe not even mainly in Edinburgh, they set out with maybe a single objective, and there can be too much of a focus on one objective and not enough on integrating and looking at everything that we're trying to achieve on a street. And again, the circulation plan is very much about trying to do that for each and every project that we take forward. And how it works is I should say that we've taken a series of reports to our Transport and Environment Committee over the last 8 months, starting last October. We took one in October, one in December, and one in February, and those set out the process that we've gone through in developing the circulation plan to date. The one in December, if you want to look at it, is probably the best one to look at. That includes the plans, and it also includes something about the principles for resolving conflicts between different forms of transport. So what we're doing with the plan is we're layering networks for the different modes of transport on top of each other. And I'm just going to quickly flick through the various maps that we've got for doing this. There's one here for walking and wheeling, and the red streets are the ones we're calling the primary network, and those are the places where there's most people walking, shopping streets, city centre, and then the tenement areas you can see there as the places which predominantly making up the secondary network, also quite a lot of people walking essentially. This is the cycling network that's in the circulation plan and in the active travel plan, and you'll see there the aspiration for a network that is truly citywide and truly caters for all journeys to have the potential to be made by bike. And it's in two layers there, primary ones in darker green and the secondary ones in a lighter green behind. And what that would deliver is a network that has a kind of a route that's within 250 to 400 metres of every house in the city. The tram network in the thick line there is the existing route and the route that's soon to open down to Leith and Newhaven, and then the dotted lines are potential future tram extensions. Layering on there, this is the city's bus network. Darker lines, primary routes, lighter lines, secondary routes. At which streets to give an emphasis to which modes on. And this map here, which we presented in December, is a start of that. And just to give you an indication of what a couple of the colours mean, the red on the map is streets where we're suggesting place, walking and wheeling priority, and those tend to be, broadly speaking, the shopping streets in the city. The green ones are the cycle network, the dark blue public transport priority and cycle network, and there is there's a tension there and issues to be resolved. And then there are some other colours there. I won't go through the whole thing because I don't want to take too much time. Sitting alongside that map are a set of principles which are in the appendix to the report we took in December, and those are all about how you go about resolving and prioritising modes where you are in a conflict situation. What we're hoping to do and to report back to the committee late this year early next year, is to look again at the networks and how they overlay with each other, and whether we need to adapt and move some of those network proposals in places where we can't resolve conflicts. Secondly, we're looking in a bit more detail at the city centre in the context of the city centre transformation programme that was approved under the last administration, and how to adapt the road network as we go forward with that. And lastly, identifying priorities for investment, and particularly for integrated investment in public transport and active travel along corridors. So we're doing both things at the same time, or several things at the same time on one corridor. So that's a sort of a quick run through the active travel plan and the circulation plan. And I think with that, I'm going to hand back to Councillor Arthur.
So thank you, Phil. So just a few slides left, you'll be glad to hear, and I've got to stand over here, I've forgotten. So in terms of the conflicts, the consultation is part of how residents and stakeholder groups can feed into how they think the conflicts could be resolved. But we've also run workshops, which I think probably some people in this room came to, where people can have, using these physical models, actually think about how they could take this forward, which is what we looked at. So this is the Morningside one here, and we expanded the footpaths to 4 metres each side. At one point, they were 4.5 metres wide at my table, and I have to say, someone from Living Streets said, "Oh, that's too wide," which was never thought I'd heard Living Streets complain that footpaths are too wide. But maybe I shouldn't have been quite so indiscreet. So that was actually really interesting again about those conflicts and the different perspectives on what should be prioritised, because nothing well. And so this takes me on to this part of this change we're going through. And the numbers, I don't know if these numbers are correct or not, but it's really about the message that it sends. So it's saying here that basically in a local high street, so like Morningside or whatever, 10% of the spend in some of those local shops might come from passing vehicles. Okay, and so you could say, well, 10%, that's small, we can afford just to sideline that. But the reality is that there's no trader, in Morningside or Christorfin on those high streets that is willing to give up 10% of their income. So what we have to do is we have to get the place function right. We have to get the other transport options right into these areas. So whilst they might be giving up something in terms of how we're managing parking in those areas a bit better, they're gaining something as well. So it's about communicating the benefits to businesses. I've met a few times now. She's a really powerful advocate for people with impaired mobility. And it's been really fascinating listening to her about her perspectives on projects which I thought were really good. She was quite quick to correct me. And also, that's why I was quite measured on what I was saying about CC well earlier, because she's also raised some concerns about that scheme. So working with accessibility groups is absolutely key to getting active travel and public travel, the public transport piece right, just like working with businesses too. So that's dimensions we have to be really careful of. So opportunities rather than conclusions, very quickly, and then I can pass on. So working with obviously the whole city, but businesses and accessibility groups is absolutely key to getting this right if we're going to have schemes that people cherish and schemes that work well. I didn't really touch on it quite so much, and it's more on the public transport piece rather than active transport. But getting the public transport piece right is absolutely key that will work better with surrounding local authorities, and that is happening. But there is still tension there, but I think it is better than it has been. And the bus priority measures were published last week are really transformative in that respect. And it's worth looking at the discussion about that in the Transport Committee about park and ride, etc. And also contributing to national progress. Now, what that is about reminding ourselves that whilst things can be incredibly controversial in Edinburgh, but when you go to other cities, they're entirely normal. And trams are a great example of that. Trams are incredibly controversial in Edinburgh, but when people go on holiday in Europe, they're quite commonplace. People use them, people love them. And the same is about getting active travel right, everyday walking and, you know, cycling for everyone. It's important that people see that this works well elsewhere.
Very slick here this evening, as you can tell. We didn't rehearse any of it. Thank you so much, Councillor Arthur. Thank you very much, Phil Noble, for a very clear presentation. And now we're going to have a dissection, a painless one, I hope. So I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Adrian Davis, who is a professor at Napier University in the Transport Research Institute. And he's going to be throwing a kitchen sink.
Voila. Ah, merci. Okay, right. Oh, and a clicker. It's really advanced economy. Right, okay. I have lots of sticky notes, some of which I wrote before I came, and some of which I've been listening intently to what the front row has been saying. So, hello, I'm Adrian Davis. I am a professor of transport and health at Edinburgh Napier University's Transport Research Institute. In academia, a derived demand. What the hell is that? It means it's not there generally for itself, it's there to serve a purpose, to get you from A to B, to meet your friends, to... One of the outcomes of public health, the outcomes of transport is whether it improves population health or not. Do we become more ill as a society, as a population, to become less physically active, more physically active? Do we suffer from respiratory problems more because of pollutants in the air, particularly the particulates, which are carcinogenic, etc., and etc. So, the slides have been put up. I just want to say a few things before I go through. I've only got 3 slides because they're just kind of prompts, really. Is that I've been looking at what Edinburgh's been doing for probably 30 years on and off, because Edinburgh has always had this reputation, rightly or wrongly, is this right, true, Phil? It's rightly that it's been one of the most progressive councils in the UK. Now, you can say that, and then you think, well, that actually doesn't mean very much, because in transport terms, if you go abroad, as Councillor Scott mentioned, if you go to Freiburg in Germany, there's 8 different tram lines crossing the city, and 5- and 6-year-old children go to school and go to their friends' houses on their own without an adult. Can you imagine that here? Can you imagine that anywhere else without the parent being arrested for lack of care and concern for their children? But that's true, and the same in Swiss locations as well, and in other places besides. So Edinburgh has been seen as a relatively progressive city, and is it worthy in a way of what the comparators in the UK were their TfL, Transport for London, which is immensely different on many, many levels. You know, it's 32 boroughs and 8 million people, and it's not the same as at all as it is in Edinburgh with a population of just over 500,000. So it's difficult to provide a real comparator in the UK, but nonetheless, parking has been relatively good in Edinburgh compared to the other UK cities, because you have parking wardens and people know if you are going to park illegally, there is a fair chance you will get fined. That's fairly good. 20 miles an hour, which is very close to my heart, and Phil knows. Phil came down to the city I used to work in England, and I think his team looked at that city's 20-mile-an-hour programme, seemed to actually copy it fairly closely, I think, major roads included. So, you know, 20 on its own is not enough. 20 is not enough. But if you start building other things onto 20 miles an hour, maybe it's LTNs, those are low traffic neighbourhoods, maybe they are school street schemes, maybe other schemes, then you potentially get the synergies. And synergies is a word I'm going to use a number of times, because generally, unless you're talking about road pricing or very what we call macro interventions, could be big fiscal policy changes, which unfortunately the Scottish Government doesn't have the ability to control. It's still controlled down in Westminster. But unless you can do those, the best we often think we can end up doing is doing lots of small interventions and putting them together, because you do get synergetic effects, positive synergetic effects, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And then the other thing is, possibly with the exception then of the residents of East Edinburgh, who might be a bit annoyed about the lack of any decent bus service, one of the things that, for reasons which I'm not going to go into tonight, is that the 1985 Transport Act, which was deliberately designed by the Conservative Party at that time to undermine public transport, to privatise public transport, particularly bus services, did not happen in Edinburgh. And that is why, despite you as residents thinking sometimes the bus service isn't very good, actually, and sorry to kind of counter what the convener said, relatively to other places, the bus service is good. And that's just, you know, when you're a visitor, you think, oh, actually, I can get a bus relatively easily. Perhaps not in East Edinburgh. So, with those little provisos of reflections, so what I would say, and I say to students and to anyone else who'll listen for that matter, if we want to do something, let alone what Edinburgh City said it's going to do in terms of 20% reduction in car kilometres by 2030 for the whole of Scotland, which I can tell you the transport team in Transport Scotland worry about. And if I was them, I'd worry about it too, because they've set themselves up with a very, very, very tough target. Show me a country in Europe that is trying to do that and thinks they've got a good chance of achieving it. So what Edinburgh City Council have done is said, well, we can do 50% more than that. I think, you know, you are going to have to do, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to throw the kitchen sink at it. That's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to use every single tool that you've got to do that. And that means some very, very tough things. There's some messages here for our convener, from me in a minute. So one of the things you're going to have to do is you're going to absolutely have to ensure everything you do is not at all based on predict and provide. Now, predict and provide, for those of you that aren't aware of this transport jargon, is we predict how much car use there might be by modelling it, and then we build the roads network capacity. That essentially is what we've had since 1945. We've had, and this is about big oil, by the way. This is like big pharma. It's like big tobacco. It's out there to make money and not care about the outcome in terms of population health. So as a public health doctor, my job is to say, as an advocate based on the science, that we have to say absolutely no to that. We have to stop doing any predict and provide. I often say the models in transport planning historically, the ones that have been used, are absolute rubbish because they put rubbish in so they get rubbish out. And that's the modelling we often have in transport planning, unfortunately. And it still filters through into the economic modelling system that is used by Transport Scotland, unfortunately. Is there anyone here who wants to admit they work for Transport Scotland at the moment? No, your hands firmly underneath your legs. Okay, so we must not have that. We've now got to move from predict and provide to decide and provide. That means we say the direction of travel, and picking up on what Carolyn said at the very start, what is the biggest threat to human health? The biggest threat to human health and to every other species on the planet is climate change. That's what's going to knock us off our perch and end life on Earth for us. The other life will continue for some species at some point. So if we want to stop that catastrophic thing, which probably won't really affect anyone in the room here, I'm looking for who's the youngest person in the room, and it certainly ain't me. It's probably our children and their children are going to absolutely say, why in hell's name did you keep doing what you did yesterday? Because that's one of the big problems. We keep doing what we did yesterday because that's what we know. And actually, we've got to stop that. We've got to stop predict and provide, and what you've got to do is decide and provide. You know, we've got to decide if the ambition is to reduce car kilometres by 30% in Edinburgh, which is, in a sense, equitably right, because in urban areas it's easier, far easier, relatively easier, to switch journeys from car, say, to walking, cycling, public transport than it is in more rural areas. It's not to say rural areas don't have to play their part, but it's easier for us to do it in more urban areas. So we've got to do that, and that requires leadership. Now, the big challenge, the the big challenge, particularly to the politicians in the room, but particularly to our convener, is you are in a coalition. Is that the right word? I'm not sure if it's a coalition or a minority administration. Thank you for the correction. Whereby you have admitted a few minutes ago that you have to work in partnership, which sounds great, with other parties in order to get things through. The problem is those compromises will slow you down. What we absolutely need now is throwing the kitchen sink at everything and doing things as fast as possible. Now, that's really difficult in local government, because what does local government do? It works by incrementalism. It does things slowly, steadily, which, of course, really annoys the advocates for change, like Spokes and others, because how long does it take us to do these things? I mean, I think you mentioned earlier about George Street. Someone that did their inaugural speech in 2006, and here we are in 2014. What has been going on in that last 8 years? Not a lot. Now, is that because a lot of people are saying we don't want it, we don't want it, we don't want it? Yeah, okay, so yes, I think someone said yes then. So this is a real challenge. Now, that is a catch-22. You are in a catch-22 situation. I presume what you'd say to me is that if we try to just run ahead with these things, say we're going to do it, we're not going to look over our shoulder all the time and worry about whether the other councillors are with us or not, they'll throw us out. That is a political dilemma you're in. But the planet and the population health in Edinburgh cannot wait. It cannot wait for those things to be sorted out. So there is simply no time for deferring, for slowing, delaying any interventions that we should have had that have been on the cards for years and years and years. So the kitchen sink is one of the things we must do. And just to give you a flavour of some of the evidence, because clearly what we try to do in public health is do the advocacy, as I've mentioned, based on firm scientific evidence, not based on reading the Sunday supplements. So some of you who read this stuff are interested, and I suspect spokes members particularly will be like that. You'll be reading the blurb, you'll be looking at the science. That you may remember that one of the most powerful interventions we've actually had in the whole of the UK on transport in recent decades has been sustainable travel towns. Anyone heard of sustainable travel towns? Yes, I can see a few hands. Well, Phil, yeah, I'd be worried if you hadn't. But if you could brief your convener about it, that might be good. So one of the things about sustainable travel towns was, and of course this actually was a Labour administration nationally did this. Let's give them their credit. So when Labour were in power in London from 1997, one of the things that they did, starting with, I was going to call it two Jags John, wasn't it? Unfortunately, yeah, Johnny Prescott. He was actually a very nice man. He still is a very nice man, I suspect. He hasn't probably changed. Is that the sustainable travel towns gave Peterborough, Worcester and Darlington some money, not a lot of money actually, a few £1 million each, which wasn't very much, and they were supposed to match it to do as much as they could within 5 years to accelerate sustainable travel in those towns. Now, what this report on the left, which is by TRL. TRL used to be the government's research agency until the Tories kind of hived it off, semi-privatised it. But TRL is still a very good, highly respected, independent research agency. And they did a report 5 years after the Sustainable Travel Town end, which is quite unusual to have a study that's 5 years after, which means you've got 5 years post-intervention. So you can see things like what we call the halo effect. When the money started to run out, did people still keep the behaviours that they might have got? And what we found from that, reading that report by Marcus Jones and Sally Cairns, was yes, they did. There were really big changes in travel behaviour, particularly towards walking, cycling and public transport there. But even with these, overall in the three towns, there was a reduction in total traffic levels of the order of 2%. Remember what we're thinking of trying to do nationally with the targets. 2%! Together with a reduction of 7 to 10% in the number of car driver trips per resident. Cycling estimated as being a 26 to 30% increase in cycling. You've got to remember that proportionally. If there's very few cyclists, a 26 to 30%, the maths tells you you've got 5 more cyclists, and that's not really it. Walking was obviously at a higher level generally, so it increased less. But nonetheless, this was the best we've ever achieved as an experiment. You know, you take the agar jelly plate, try and put a few ingredients in, see what happens, see what the synergies are. I think I've already mentioned the synergies. That if you start putting in more bus lanes, if you put in more crossing times for pedestrians, they didn't have them then, but if you now start putting in continuous footways across side streets, and we've had those trials in Manchester, we've now had trials in Cardiff, which show they're very successful. Drivers tend to yield. That's quite good and reassuring. The group that were least comfortable with that were disabled people, which I think reflects what you showed in the slide. But this was a report that showed if you do it, you can actually achieve some really significant changes. The best in class, I think. Now, the really sad thing was that Labour lost a bloody election. And so, therefore, everything stopped. And if you remember, and you're interested in transport at that time, we had the bonfire, the Quango, Cycling England were thrown in the bin, and many other organisations were thrown in the bin because they were just Labour. And that tends to be one of the problems we have in the UK, that one party wins, the other one gets thrown out, and then you throw out all their policies. Certainly that's what happens down south, that's what's happened here. So that's the reason why that report never went anywhere. And apart from a few wayward academics like me reminding people that it actually exists, you can go and get it easily online, it's kind of history, unfortunately. The right-hand report, so I need to go back. The right-hand report is a report that I was involved in doing. It's an evidence review, more biased papers out. We did an evidence review to find out, the question was, what are the best ways to increase active travel? So that's really, it was really walking and cycling. That's what the funder particularly wanted, rather than wheeling as well. And the funder was interesting because it was Sport England. So what the hell is Sport England interested in active travel? Well, sort of Sport England have kind of realised, probably like Sport Scotland, that actually you need to get the population just active rather than just focusing on sports field. Get them on the sports field later, that's fine, but we need to get people to stand up first and start moving around. So we found in our review that the most effective interventions, and I've already said this, so it's kind of it's the takeaway point. The most effective interventions are multiple interventions. Put in your cycle facilities, put in your walking facilities, put in your bus facilities, put in the tram, of course. Do all these things together and do more. Put in the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit tick. Do other things you've yet to do, but do them all together and as fast as you possibly can. As fast as you possibly can. I'm running out of time. Oh, God. I've got loads of sticky notes here. So one of the things in terms of moving towards a conclusion then, having just remembered I've got to show you this, which was, I'm just going to leave this up here. These are, actually, you're not going to be able to read that, are you? Terrible. You can see the slides maybe afterwards. But it was the findings of the report just showing actually that we could achieve positive change. I need to skip forward to try and at least mention a couple more of my sticky notes. So one of the things I always say when we think about is Edinburgh a city that you can live in without a car? Well, for some of us, I do, you know, so it's possible. But it depends on a number of factors. It depends on my confidence, my self-efficacy to feel that I'm able to cycle around without being scared that the person that's just passed me with an inch to spare, you know, that doesn't happen too often type of thing. Lots of other things, competencies, and also where I can afford to live that isn't miles and miles out on the edge of town and certainly not outside the bypass, etc., and all that sort of thing. So it can be a place you can travel in without a car, but that's not true for the majority of people. And let's just think about the groups that don't actually have their voices heard very much, and that's children. Under the UN Rights of the Child, children are supposed to have their voices heard according to their age and competencies. We tend to forget that. We do surveys of adults and we forget to ask about children. Also, we need to think about parents. Why do parents own cars? Well, some of the reasons why they own cars is because they feel the need, rightly or wrongly, to drive their children to school. And we need to tackle those things very, very head-on in terms of if we want children, this is an old one, you'll know, that if you want children to be the adults that are comfortable to walk and cycle and to use the bus services and not start relying on a car, then you've got to start that in early life. We do it in all sorts of areas of public policy for children. We need to give them, like the Sure Start programs we used to have for children from multi-private communities. You need to give them a healthy start in life. And if children are carried to school, able-bodied children are carried to school, they're going to expect that. It's going to be part of their social normalcy. So skipping ahead and not throwing lots of stickers out the way, actually I could throw that one away because that's synergies. Skipping right to the end, I've just done children's rights. It's really satisfying if I screw a few more bits up. I'll feel better about it. We do need to ensure that we have, since this is a spokes event, we need to ensure we have a cycling infrastructure, whether it's segregated or not segregated, that's got low speeds on it, that children from at least age 8 all the way to adults of at least 80 can feel comfortable on, and we don't have that. So I think, that is a litmus test for the council that we need to ensure that we do that. The problem with all the challenges we've got is we need to go much, much faster than we've been doing, and we need to rely much more and use the science that is out there that often the officers aren't aware of because they don't read peer-reviewed journals, and I don't have enough time to go through that. Maybe we can discuss that in questions. But we need to draw on the evidence in order to be bolder and to move faster. I think I ought to shut up, so I will. Thank you.
I'll just say a quick thank you to the speakers. And before handing over to Caroline, we're going to have the Q&A session now. Caroline will be chairing it, and if Phil and Scott would like to join them on the podium. We'd appreciate it if you indicate that you want to ask a question by raising your hand, and Caroline will pick people to ask the questions, and Emma will come round with a microphone so that you can speak into it. If you don't have the microphone, then nobody's going to hear you, so wait till you get the microphone, and hopefully we'll see fair play.
And can I ask you that you'll make your comments as succinct as possible and as courteous as possible as well, please. Okay, ready to go?
Former Transport Convener, Leslie McInnes at the back, and Leslie's colleague, Marta Matashquelu. Yes. Welcome. Lovely to have you with us. I studied in Lisbon. What can I say? That's my first announcement. A couple of dates for your diary, ladies and gents. Saturday is critical mass, so if you're free Saturday afternoon, you fancy a lovely cycle around the city with some friends and some music. 2 o'clock, Middle Meadow Walk. Another date, the bike breakfast, which I believe is the 13th of June. City Chambers, in the morning, bacon rolls, and a speech from Kirsty. Plant-based bacon. Yes, plant-based bacon. Bacon type rolls. Excellent. So that's bike breakfast, City Chambers. Don't forget, before you leave, if you haven't joined, please go to the Spokes stall at the back and renew your membership, buy a map, volunteer, do all of those things. So don't go out without doing that. And then finally, I don't think we've talked about it very much so far, but there are some public events coming up around the consultations, which are starting, I believe, next week and running through into June. So there's quite a few events in the diary. So you can go and turn up to those and ask questions and find out even more than you found out this evening. All right, that's the end of the announcements and the notices. And now, ladies and gents, it's over to you. So I believe there's a gentleman here holding a hot microphone, ready to go. So over to you, sir.
Hello, my name is Guy Johnson. I think this is mainly a question for Councillor Arthur, but it reflects, it is what is relevant to this is working with other councils and the urgency of dealing with the problems that we have, which Professor Davis mentioned. Is there any chance of stopping the appalling redevelopment of the Sheriff Hall roundabout, which at enormous expense, I believe possibly over £100 million, is simply going to funnel more traffic into the centre of Edinburgh and make all these other synergies far more difficult to be effective.
So what I would say is, before I was elected in 2017, the previous administration submitted the city deal, which Sheriff Hall Roundabout was part of. We never asked for Sheriff Hall Roundabout. Sheriff Hall Roundabout was going to happen anyway. What the council asked for was affordable housing to meet Edinburgh, to try to deal with Edinburgh's housing crisis. But the Scottish Government in wisdom gave us a roundabout, and unfortunately that does nothing to solve our housing crisis. And my concern with what they're doing with it is it's just the start of upgrading the bypass bit by bit, because if we know if we build that roundabout, it's just going to create another queue somewhere else, and there'll be a call to expand that there. So what I would say is, if that is the plan, they should be open and honest about that, and we can discuss that. But what's happening just now, it's not clear to me that it's good value for money at all. Last week we spoke about bus priority measures, £250 million worth, and that will enable us to cut bus journey times in the city by 25% on arterial routes. I think money's better spent on things like that. And perhaps also making under 22 tram travel free for young people in Edinburgh as well, better spent on things like that. So hopefully, I feel quite strongly about it, to be honest.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi there, Kirsty Lewin with my Spokesporty hat on. Thanks to all three of you for some really good presentations. Really appreciate it. Scott, can I call you Scott, or do I have to call you Councillor? I wanted to ask you, you made a sort of couple of throwaway comments about Sir Harry Lauder Road and the junction there, and obviously that's very close to our hearts. There's been 2 recent deaths and 1 death before the redesign, so that's three deaths that were all preventable of cyclists at that junction. Can you just talk very briefly about where we are now with the junction, and particularly you made a reference to staffing problems which were causing delays. We can't have delays to a junction where we've had 2 + 1 deaths. It's unacceptable. And so if you could just give us a quick rundown on where we are with the junction, but also more generally about how you mitigate against the staffing problems when lives are at risk.
Well, more funding. That's the issue. Fundamentally, more funding. So Sir Harry Lauder Road, the stakeholder group, which they'll get an update. I think it is on Tuesday. I'll chair that meeting. Since the last meeting, there's been traffic modelling done, so slight changes to design, and there'll be options to look at. The feedback from that group will go to the Transport Committee in June. I can't say more than that because it's kind of confidential just now, because I've seen our draft report, so I can't say what's in the draft report. But there'll be options on the table. But one of the tensions is that obviously at the same time we're doing a 20-minute neighbourhood in Portobello, and one of the tensions is making sure that these 2 projects don't conflict, because one of the things we're looking at is queuing times at the different arms of that junction, because some of the options have quite significant queuing times, and that has real impact on public transport, which I don't want to happen. But we're hopeful that the 20-minute neighbourhood in Portobello will actually reduce some of the pressures. Perhaps I'm being optimistic. So one of the tensions is making sure we've got these 2 projects interacting, and that I can't remember you're in the stakeholder group, but that's a question that's worth asking on Tuesday.
Thank you very much. This gentleman here at the front.
Thank you. I'm Ben Bate. I live locally, and picking up on a thing that Adrian Davis mentioned about encouraging children to walk and wheel. I live quite close to 2 schools, one of which is private, and people there are driven to school in enormous vehicles. And the other one is a state school, and I don't have the figures, but I would say that they're not. They walk or they get the bus. So is there a case, therefore, for banning private schools?
That isn't a direction I thought we'd go in this evening, but Adrian.
Well, as a human being that votes, yes, but that's besides. I mean, the issue I think is, so I've just come back from Denmark, and I was travelling around Denmark on the trains and using some local buses. I didn't actually get on a bike, which is a bit odd. But one of the things I noticed there, and I go to Denmark relatively frequently, as in every few years, is that I've noticed that there were no SUVs. So I live in Bruntsfield, and in Bruntsfield and Morningside, the Chelsea tractors are everywhere, you know, and these vehicles probably never go off the highway. You know, it's a status thing. It's just, in my view, a disgusting thing that people choose to do, but they do it. You don't see them in Denmark. Now, this is not something that, unfortunately, Edinburgh Council can do anything about. It's not something even the Scottish Government can do something because about withheld powers in Westminster. But in Denmark, there is a weight tax. It's a carbon/weight tax, which means lots of rich people in Denmark just don't buy very big SUV vehicles because even though they've got lots of money, the tax is so high they just get a nice ordinary car that does what they need to do, but they don't get. So there are things that could be done, but they're just not doable by the local authority, or in this case, even. Yeah.
So I didn't mean to cut you short. Sorry. But so routes to school are really important, and so they're being reviewed just now, not as fast as I would like, or really anybody would like, and I think. If I was to say, you know, what I've failed to do over the last year is probably accelerate that, but that's because of funding and it's because of staff availability. But we're at the stage now where I think school streets, which is where the road is closed outside the school, particularly, at the very least at peak times. I think there's 12 or 14 just now in Edinburgh. I mean, I wanted us to move to the point where these were the default. But currently in the pipeline, and hopefully I'm not giving away secrets here, currently in the pipeline there's an additional 30 school streets in the pipeline. And I'm also something I believe personally, I'm not saying this is a view of the Transport Committee, I think private schools should be part of the same process we go through around routes to school. They shouldn't be exempt from that. So it might be that some of them might benefit from a school street as well to deal with some of the problems you're talking about.
All right, we're going to move on. There was a question here as well. I'll come over to this side. Don't worry, I've got a couple of you already pegged on this side.
Thank you, Irene Buteman here. I really welcome your comments about climate change, your comments, Adrian, specifically about public health. But when we talked about inequality, there was very little there, and very little that I've read in the plans when it comes to the inequality and the deprivation around Edinburgh. We have a lot of inequality, we have a lot of deprivation, and we know that if we get transport and the ability to move around a city right, then we give people access to work, education, health, culture, services, everything around that. And I wonder if there is an opportunity as you move forward to be including more around the content of your own poverty plan and the areas that you've identified as having poverty across the city, and to be referring to that and how the way that we move around our city can help that. And also I wonder about the events that you've got coming up. Are you specifically going out?
Which is in one of the more deprived parts of my ward. A feeling, I mean, deprivation is something we talk much more about in council in this administration and even in the Transport Committee. So last week when we were talking about cycle hangers, which massive expansion, I think we're quite clear that previously these tended to be in more affluent areas, but now that is changing. The previous bike hire scheme, I believe one of the reasons it failed was because it wasn't in more deprived areas. So kids from more deprived areas didn't think the scheme belonged to them, it was for someone else. So I think, so if it was to come back, we would use a bike hire scheme to get kids everyone from more deprived areas more active, absolutely. Public transport, why I'm so passionate about public transport, because it's so important to people on lower incomes. And one of the most shameful things actually is if you look at where bus trackers are in this city, There's very few in deprived areas. The part of my ward which uses buses most, anecdotally, is Oxgangs. There's not one single bus tracker in Oxgangs. There's no shortage of them in Fairmile Head. And so these things can't be changed overnight, but they're absolutely on the radar. And poverty is one of the 3 pillars, I think it is, of this administration, sort of fighting poverty, not poverty. Fighting poverty along climate and the economy, I think. I forget what they are. Hopefully nobody asks these questions. It's absolutely key to what we're doing in the city, because, Cammy Day, who's the council leader, he led on the Poverty Commission, and it's absolutely core to everything he wants to speak about. So thanks. And if we don't get this right, get in touch. Please get in touch. Thank you.
A great question. Thank you very much. Now we had... Did you want... Yeah. That gentleman at the back in the dark jacket with a nice Nike swoosh on it.
Hi, Dave French. Do any of you really believe that Edinburgh has the 5th best public transport system in Europe?
I think we can go to everyone on the panel for a response on this one, because Phil hasn't spoken yet. Do you want to start with Phil?
He's got the mic. I think it's got the best. I think for our city, loading buses has evolved along with our city. And it's true, we've not got a rail system really inside the city, or really a tram network, but we've got a fantastic bus network which has evolved with the city. It could be better, but every time I speak to the bus company, and I speak to the individual members of staff, and I speak to the trade union reps, I always come away hugely proud with what it achieves. 300,000 trips every day. It's absolutely incredible, And it's when I speak to other people who lead on other bus companies, because some are on the boards of the tram and bus company, they are jealous of what we've got in this city. A publicly owned bus network where every single bus, no matter how old or new it is, looks like it just came out of the factory. And we've got, and the really important thing about public transport in Edinburgh, which I think is only the same in London and in Edinburgh, is that if you go on the bus in Edinburgh, you see a complete cross-section of society. It's not just something for poorer people, it's something for everybody. So you've got people, the lowest paid people in the city, and the best paid people in the city, all on that bus together. And I think that's a absolutely fantastic thing. So yeah, thank you.
Would you like to come in?
Yeah, so I think I touched on this before, so I don't want to take up too much time, but I think there's still a way to go, so I wouldn't say tops, and that's not being unfair to the city, I don't think. It's just, if I give you back that example I made of Freiburg, let's start waiting to see that children feel comfortable about travelling independently and their parents feel comfortable about them travelling. Obviously, that is more than transport, it's more than that. It's about our society and whether we have liberal values or whether we have neoliberal values, which of course is where some parts of the UK are trying to take us. But if we have an environment where people feel safe, we then start seeing our children feeling able and our parents comfortable with them travelling by bus. That will be when we really got there. But I think it's a good point that about cross-section of the city's population. That is very, very true when I'm on the bus.
I agree with both, and I think we do probably have the best bus system of any UK city outside London. And we've got a good public transport system by comparison with many European cities.
Okay, we've got a question here, the gentleman with the little round glasses on. Now, I'm noticing a slight trend towards the beardy people in the audience at the moment. So any non-beards? Yes, we've had a couple of non-beards, but we're starting to get into the beardy bit. So I just encourage non-beards to put their hands up. Okay.
I'm quite proud of that. I've been growing that for a couple of years now. So yeah, it's good. I had a question for Adrian and Phil, and it was kind of to do with like this profession's changed so much in the last 10, even the last 5 years. Like the investment that's going to it and how much is happening. But it was, how do we get professionals up to date with the latest like theory and skill them? And I was only saying that because when I went into the field recently, I was a little bit disappointed. I don't know, meeting a lot of like your more traditional highway engineers, and they're working on this. And I feel it was very interesting going from university where you're learning. Like I feel I was the first generation that went for university when sustainability was hammered into us every year, and then you're going into these bigger engineering consultancies, and they're still very much like Cllr is king. I think it's changed even the last year, but it was how can you change maybe the thinking behind some of these decision makers in the consultancies. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. One of the things I try to do, I often say I'm not a proper academic because I'm trying to be someone standing between practitioners and the real, my die-hard proper academics who do lots of 5-year-long studies, which I fall asleep during while they're doing it. But the reality is we have, and again I did touch on it earlier, we have good, solid research evidence from across the globe, particularly we focus just on high-income countries and dealing with how much you can compare between one place and another. We've got a lot of evidence, but particularly the last 20 years, the volume of evidence has just exponentially expanded on sustainable transport. The challenge is that our officers in Edinburgh City Council, or any other council across Scotland or anywhere else for that matter, don't read the peer-reviewed papers. They read the Institution of Highways and Transportation, they read others. They're not reading what we write. You know, they don't get it because they don't have access to it and they're too busy and they're in an organisation which is ideologically led, so they have to listen to what the politicians want them to do. But the science is very clear in terms of what we need to do, which is why I touched on the sustainable travel towns, because I don't want it to just disappear there. So I do something, for example, called Essential Evidence for Scotland. So you could go to the TRL website. This is a blatant plug, and you can go and see my one-page evidence summaries where I try to de-jargonise the academic stuff, not make you read 16 pages of jargonised rubbish, but turn it into something you can understand and officers can use, and it doesn't take up much of their time, but they can apply it. So I think we need to do much more of that, and that is actually a role as much for the academics to reach out, to get out of the town and gown problem, to reach out and be part of their city. So that's an offer to Edinburgh City Council, by the way.
Which I'm going to accept right now. Okay, so Adrian, if you'd like to come and speak to my team sometime in the next couple of months, then you're very, very welcome. I mean, I think that there is an issue here. I think it's perhaps we aren't just sort of bound within the Institute of Highways and Transportation. We are very busy, and we don't spend much time reading peer-reviewed academic journals. And we probably should, at least some of us should. And you need to recommend one or two to me. But your condensed papers, I think, have got. So I think, but we need more training. There is training happening. The training happens through Cycling Scotland, but it's probably too compartmentalised, and that might, there's a need for wider training to consult. It's about training, but it is also about better links like this. But we will try and get Adrian to come and speak to us. It's a good idea.
A great question, thank you. Councillor McInnes would like to ask a question.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to ask a question. This is really directed towards Adrian, because you were talking clearly that you have got the context of transport and health, but of course linked to that is the economy. And one of the things which I found in my 5-year tenure when all of this work started, and we got a lot of stuff underway, is that we were fighting an uphill battle to get people to understand why we were doing it. The concentration was always on the what, not the why. And the understanding around the need for sustainable transport and the benefits that it could bring, including to shopping streets, for example, where we know that the pedestrian pound, the cycle pound can make an enormous economic difference to a very wide range of businesses. There is a tendency, I think, in local government, and I hit up against this again and again, and I've heard Scott say how the Transport Committee now is full of consensus. Well, the reason for that is because all the radical stuff that we were bringing forward in the last administrative term was really unacceptable to some of the parties that you're working with closely now, because they didn't understand the fact that we had evidence that displayed the benefits of the pedestrian pound, the cycling pound, and of course the health issues attached to it. That's not specific to Edinburgh, although I would say that some of the extremes in Edinburgh in terms of thinking are very hard to deal with as a politician. How do you help politicians in particular, but also community representatives and the people who are involved in those conversations, how do you help them to understand the why rather than the concentration on the what?
That's like a Russian doll question, because there's an answer inside each one which then requires another answer, which I don't obviously have the time to go through. So one of the things I just want to talk about in response, and I hope this will deal with a bit of it, is something called pluralistic ignorance. Now, pluralistic ignorance is all around us. It is this concept, and it's kind of very much used by the neoliberals, which is that we say that those people who are against LTNs or school street closures or 20 miles an hour, they say these things don't work, they cause more pollution, they're more dangerous or whatever it is, without evidence. But what they do is these are very loud voices amongst a small minority. So what happens is you end up with people who are in a majority group. If we take 20, which I'm very close to in terms of research I've done, the majority of the UK population, if you just ask adults, and let's forget children because I suspect they'll support 20, but if you ask the majority of adults who are in a representative sample, we know that they support 20 miles an hour. Repeat British Social Attitude Survey, repeat YouGov surveys show about 65 to 70% of people, and then it's not all of the rest are against it, it's quite a lot of don't knows. So what we find in those surveys also is that those people that support 20 believe they're in the minority, so they keep quiet. They don't think they should speak up. This is what we call spirals of silence. So then the minority can continue to shout and make the politicians feel that there is much more opposition to things than there are. We've seen it in LTNs. It's very interesting this week that the lovely rag that we read in transport planning, and I'm sure there's lots of copies, maybe electronically now, on the desk of a transport team at Edinburgh, is Local Transport Today. And Local Transport Today has just done an analysis now as a result of the local elections across England in the last month, which showed that the areas where there was hot, contentious debate about LTNs has not come out in the voting patterns in Oxfordshire, where there was a big, fierce debate, and some of you have seen the kind of on-the-street kind of rules that have been happening and being reported by the press that love that sort of thing. But it's a very, very small minority making a lot of noise, trying to make us feel that we're in the minority. So what I think, and this applies, and I was actually at Transport Scotland's annual, not their annual, they have a meeting every 3 or 4 years for their staff. This was the first time after the pandemic they got together. So about 500 of us in Glasgow yesterday. And one of the things I was talking to them about is that people bring in their own myths and believe because of what they've heard outside. And if no one challenges it, they'll take it into their working life, and then it gets traction inside the group, and it becomes the social norm. And what we need to be really aware of is things becoming the social norm based on erroneous information, which is often deliberately placed by neoliberalism. So that's that's a partial answer, Leslie, to that question. Thank you.
Do Scott or Phil want to come in on that? No. Okay, good. There were a couple of questions down here. We've got some other hands over that side. So, I mean, let's go to the red top, okay, and then we'll come to Dave in his check shirt in a moment.
Thank you. So my question's for Phil, actually. I was very pleased to see the circulation plan. I think that's a really sensible idea, possibly even an obvious one, but it's nice that it's getting into place. And obviously the challenge where you've got all these different modalities going down one road. And I was just thinking, isn't the idea of the quiet routes something that could feed into that rather than trying to put everybody down the main road all the time? I'm thinking myself, I live on the Greenbank to Meadows quiet route with a bit of tweaking that could take us all into Toll Cross, So that's the basic question. What's the role of the quiet routes playing in that connectivity map?
So I mean, essentially, the answer to that question is I think there is a role for quiet routes and for quiet roads. It's not we're not with the new plan throwing the whole concept of the old one out of the window. What we're saying is that there is an increased role for segregation in dealing with our issues, because what we do have in main roads is roads that tend to go from the places where people live to the places where they want to be, and they're usually the flattest, shortest, and most direct routes. So it's about finding the best. The circulation plan is really about finding the best solution for a way to try and systematize finding the best solution that works for all the different modes of transport, and quiet routes have a part to play in that, and the one you're talking about may well have a part to play in that.
Dave is next. We'll come across to this side. You're being very patient, don't worry. I've seen you. Dave. You're holding the mic.
Okay. I'd like to ask a question which is of considerable concern to Spokes Planning Group at the moment, and it relates very much to the question of competition for road space, and also what Adrian Davis said about the need to get away immediately from predict and provide. And it's about the LEZ, which Spokes is very much in favour of, but we appreciate mitigation measures are needed on the roads around that. But we would like these mitigation measures to be to restrict rat running rather than to provide for and encourage it. And we're particularly concerned about Morrison Street. In the transformation policy, Morrison Street is down as a main cycle route. In the circulation plan, it's a road where place and sustainable modes should be prioritised. Now, the council is planning to remove one of the traffic lanes westbound in the middle section, but rather than giving this removed traffic lane over to cycle route and wider footways, as you'd expect from the policies, they're planning to turn it over to a motor traffic lane in the other direction. So Morrison Street becomes two-way for motor traffic, and you lose the opportunity of that gained traffic lane for using it for cycling and walking. So Spokes regrettably has had to object to the traffic order on this, and I know quite a few individuals have as well. And I think it's a good example of where predict and provide is being used rather than taking the opportunity. So if I could ask the council representatives to comment on that, and possibly Adrian as well.
Just before the panel comes to this, just a reminder to the audience, succinct questions. We're tending into the slightly, mini lecture stage, but anyway. Who would like to go first with this? Adrian's shaking his head. Scott, I'll come to you then.
So, Dave, thanks for that. I can't speak to the specifics of that, I'm afraid. I mean, I'm not familiar enough with it to comment on why the layout's taken that shape. But what I would say is that we do have this target of reducing car miles in the city by 30% by 2030. And I think I'm right in saying the committee as a whole is bought into that. So when we're doing things like the junction review, which is part of where Sir Harry Lauder comes in, these junctions will be designed around having that reduced capacity. So it's not about maintaining or increasing capacity, it's about getting the city ready for where we want it to be. The tension with a lot of this is public transport and how public transport and moving goods and services around the city. So where we obviously I think all of us in the city want there to be less cars going through the city centre to make it a better place to be. But it's how you shape the city centre in a way where people can still make those journeys on active travel, public transport, but also make sure businesses are still serviced as well. So that's where the real tension is just now. But, I accept the detail point you're making. I can't comment on that. I don't know if Phil's willing to or able to either.
I can comment briefly.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe
Okay.
I should let you go first then.
It's okay. No, so what I would say is that, this is about detail, and I think when we're meeting you, I think in roughly 12 hours' time to talk about to talk about the detail of this. And I think probably now isn't the time to get into detail. All I would say for this meeting is that specific piece of two-way is to allow vehicles that are coming to the edge of the low emission zone to have a way out. But I think probably it shouldn't go. So it's not about increasing capacity. It's about giving drivers coming to the edge of the zone a way to avoid the edge of the zone. But I think we should probably have a bit more of a detailed discussion about this tomorrow morning.
Let's move things along then. Now, in the interest of efficiency, I'm going to move from the front to the back so the microphone can move seamlessly. So we've got a question over here on the left.
Yeah, thank you, John Robson from Spokes Planning Group, but also I'm a member of Morningside Community Council, so I wanted to ask a question. You talked about the contested space of the circulation plan, and streets like Morningside were used as an example of that contested space. Firstly, I think the Community Council would love to have that exercise using the toolkit, but I'm aware that options such as bus gates weren't part of that toolkit. I want to ask why, and like a road like Morningside, there's been 2 fatalities in the last 5 years. A road death and road safety figures part of that toolkit as well. Thank you.
That's an extremely nerdy question, John. Thank you. I think Phil is probably the best person to answer this.
That's absolutely fine. So, the reason why a bus gate wasn't part of that toolkit was that the toolkit was there for a stakeholder workshop, and it was there to allow people to work on the challenges of allocating road space. It wasn't because we don't think a bus gate can be used in any particular place. It was because it was about allocating space on a street. It's not, we haven't got something against bus gates. And actually the fact that it was based on Morningside, wasn't it? I mean, we used a real road, but we didn't tell anybody it was Morningside, and it wasn't supposed to be about redesigning Morningside. It was to illustrate the challenges on a shopping street.
Will you be considering bus gates on shopping streets as part of policy, like in certain parts of London? Princes Street is a bus gate, basically. There's other. You already have the means, the rules to actually enforce bus gates with cameras, etc., etc.
The point, yes.
So the challenge we have. I mean, I don't know about the streets in London you're talking about. The challenge we have in Edinburgh is that our local high streets tend to be on arterial routes into the city, and in some of them, you know, without, I don't want to set any hairs running, but in some there is things we can do, you know, around bus gates. Perhaps in Councillor, I forgot your name for a second. I meant Councillor Mackenzie's ward, sorry. But we have to be mindful that a lot of these high streets are on routes into the city, and it's not about private cars. It's about goods and services into the city. You know, so we have to move goods and services into the city. Just now they're going along these arterial routes. So if we close them all to bus gates, then that causes a problem. So we have to think through the implications of that. Yeah, but you know, in Councillor Mackenzie's part of the world, things are a little bit more interesting because there's always this tension about what do we do with Western Approach Road. Some people want to turn it into a giant park or a cycle route through it, but keeping it in terms of, you know, the route that it provides enables us to take traffic out of Gorgie and Dalry. That's one option. I'm not saying that's what we're going to do, but that enables us to take quite a lot of traffic, if we were to go down that road, if we can use that pun, out of Gorgie and Dalry and put it over into the Western Approach Road. Or we can do it the other way. We can funnel all the traffic through Gorgie and Dalry and we can turn the Western Approach Road into a giant park. Or somewhere in between. But there is that alternative. Whereas when you think about Morningside, where would the goods and services go? I mean, it's a much more difficult problem there to solve. I'm not saying it's unsolvable, but it's a much more difficult problem.
We're going to move on from Morningside. A point well made, an interesting one. Sure. It's moving back. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. It's been a very interesting evening. So a few months ago, I was unfortunate enough to get a puncture, and I tried to get on a bus and was turned away. This is sad and whatever, but perhaps more interesting is, do any of you see opportunities for synergies with active travel and public transport, in particular with sort of last mile opportunities going forward in Edinburgh?
An excellent question, thank you. Scott, you look poised.
I'm guessing you were trying to go on the bus with your bike. Yeah. So they'll only take bikes if the folding up bikes within a carrier, you know, and that's because I know some bus companies do take bikes, but that's the decision for Lothian buses, and I have to respect that. And I think a lot of the bus services are quite busy, so it'd be actually quite a difficult thing. But of course, the trams do it, etc. But at the heart of the active travel plan is about increasing connectivity to public transport. You know, and to be honest, I was speaking to the MD of Lothian Buses 2 weeks ago about this, and she gets it as well. Of course, she's a really impressive leader. She doesn't see the public transport action plan in isolation as something she's got to deal with. She's really interested in how we can use that to connect people, walking in particular, but also public transport with also cycling, with public transport. And I think that's absolutely our aspiration. If you look at the vision for Granton, having the travel hub there for people where they can cycle to the travel hub, leave their bike there, get the tram eventually, 2035, the long way, into the city. So all this is evolving, absolutely. I don't know if you want to add to that, Phil, have I stretched it too far?
I think you stretched it far enough.
Thank you.
Okay, in the interest of time, I know there's quite a few more hands. More hands over here now. Now, yes.
I'll be quick.
Great.
Completely changing the topic. I wondered, in April, I think last month, they were testing autonomous vehicles. And I wondered if there's research on the safety of cyclists alongside autonomous vehicles, and what that says about cyclist safety, and also what the role of these things is and how it will affect plans looking ahead, because we're talking about targets to 2030. There are going to be more of these things in our lives.
Well, an excellent question. I'm going to go to Adrian as a TRI person, and then we'll come to the council perspective.
You're going to blame the neoliberals again.
I could. We could always blame the neoliberals because they are the problem of the cause of everything that's wrong. But apart from that, so I mean, I would say just from TRI's perspective that we're involved, not least because there have been deaths, particularly in the US, as a result of autonomous vehicles not behaving as they were programmed. So I think we've still got a long way to go, and I think the AI people and others have hyped this up. And it's going to take a lot longer to get to a safe point than they have been saying. So that's all I think I want to say about that point.
Lovely. I don't suppose it's part of your strategy, is it?
It's certainly not part of the strategy.
No. Okay.
I don't think there's anything to add to what Adrian said.
I suggest we move on. So the gentleman with the check shirt at the end of this row. Yeah, I'm just trying to work front to back, so the microphone doesn't have to travel so far.
Thank you. There's been a couple of times where we've talked about underrepresented communities and areas of deprivation, more specifically. And how would the panel suggest that these views that are underrepresented here today are taken on board, and a perspective for each of the panel? But also, I'm thinking this is a spokes meeting that's taking place in the city centre, and quite nice situations. Why not in Greater Pilton or Morden or Wester Hales or places like that? And how would the panel and the spokes on the cell kind of comment on that? That's not a criticism. It's not a criticism at all. It's just a question.
Okay. Who'd like to go first?
So in general, I'll let spokes talk about why they chose this venue. Of course, you're very welcome to come to my ward at any time, anyone. So we are around the various plans that were out for consultations just now. We are trying really hard to reach every corner of the city. So we are, like I said, we're going to Oxgangs Neighbourhood Centre, and libraries and community centres right across the city. I think there's about 10 or 15 listed. And this was a specific point that was made in the committee, the request around this. And now the person that's leading on this, she also reassured me that they're doing work to reach into the travelling community, also engage with, I think I'm right in saying younger people, people who might have learning disabilities, and also try to do focus groups with people in deprived areas. Hopefully I'm not stretching that too much, but I think they really are making a serious effort. There's a specialist consultant that's doing some of this. But I think the wider point you're making is right. Too often it's the same people responding to the consultations over and over again, you know, and it's the same people. A lot of them email me all the time as well. So it is something we do have to be mindful of, and it goes back to the point that Adrian was making. Sometimes you get one or two people who are contacting you all the time, and sometimes when you sit back, you say, well, where is the rest of the city? You know, so I get a lot of feedback on Twitter. But there's the silent majority out there who are just getting on with their lives. And so whilst things could be hugely controversial for some people, most people, a lot of people in the real world just look at it and say, well, I like bits of it. I wish other bits were a bit better. But on balance, it's okay. Or on balance, I wish it would go away. Most people are in the middle somewhere. And then it's really trying to reach them and engage them in the conversation. And so I'll wrap up this very quickly. I've seen the response to the consultation 1 week in. I've seen the results, and I was really alarmed by some of what I've seen in terms of early results coming through. And the officers reassured me and said it's always the same right at the start, because right at the start of the consultation, you've got all the people who are really interested, the people who have been waiting for the consultation to start, who have marked it in their diary, Caroline, who are ready for it to start. And it's only as the consultation goes on you try to reach into communities. And what I will also say, after 1 week, it was overwhelmingly men that had responded to the survey as well. Yeah.
Adrian.
So just add to that, I mean, my main point, and it does particularly include deprived communities, is the voices particularly of children, the future. The voices of women are always underrepresented, and you just reflected it there. And I really have a thing about organised consultations, particularly, I mean, we had to do them online during the pandemic, we're now out of that. They always come up with totally non-representative responses for the reasons that have just been stated. So I think we need to do a lot more, and I think it's an excellent suggestion, perhaps rotate venues. And I think that, you know, this is an old request. I think we should probably take it, or Spokes should take it and go with it.
Indeed, we won't spend time talking about Spokes for response to that, but I think I will invite Spokes folks here to take that away as something to think about. Right. Was there anybody else on this side? There's another gentleman in a check shirt. I'll come to you at the back in a moment. Okay. Yes. So succinct and concise. Both the panel and the audience. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try my best. We've talked a lot about different routing and different cycleways and everything, but also there's all these behaviours that we need to look at. So, for example, the delivery vans and everything, we seem to get 20-odd van visits in the day in our close, and really we should only need one, in having a distribution centre where they could put all their stuff and just have one van coming in. That would save a lot of fumes and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering, is that also now being considered in your plans?
Thank you. Scott.
Behavioural change, I mean, if we're serious about the climate change as a society, what we have to wean ourselves off is next day delivery for everything. I think if we're willing, because most of the stuff we buy, realistically, we can wait a few more days for it. When I was a kid, you waited 28 days for things. And I think that's what's driving a lot of this as well. But we are looking at freight consolidation. We are looking at quite routine, freight consolidation is something we're looking at. We are engaged more with the cargo biking movement, etc., to try and encourage some businesses to use that. And we're also looking at out-of-box things like using the tram to bring freight from the airport into the city, and even looking at the canal, because particularly at Hermes, looking at all these things. Nothing's off the table, but one of the challenges is the industry is incredibly competitive, and also a lot of the people who are driving vans, even when the vans are branded up, is it not DHL, the other one? Anyway, it's actually the person who's in the van owns the van. So a lot of them are self-employed. So trying to get them to work together is quite challenging. But the industry is moving in the right direction. And I spoke to some people the cargo bike movement quite recently, but there's some cynicism about why industries are getting engaged in some of the more sustainable things. Some people think it's just a bit of greenwash. But hopefully, even if we're being cynical and saying it's greenwash, hopefully dipping their toe in the water will make them realise there is different ways of doing things. I agree with you absolutely, though. Sorry for the rambling answer.
Okay, we're going to move on. Although I will note that when I bought my cashmere jumper on Vinted, I could get it delivered to the post office round the corner, and that was, you know, it was cheaper to do that. It was brilliant. Anyway, the gentleman at the back who's been super patient, concise and brief, please, sir.
Try to be. The reason that I'm standing at the back is twofold. One, I don't feel part of this congregation because it's very one-sided. And the second one is I've just driven down from the Highlands. I've gone to see two separate people in different care situations. I've driven here, and I will drive to my town centre flat. Now, for me, that does that fairly regularly, there are hundreds and thousands of people who have different reasons for getting into their car. Now, my whole life has been spent in the centre of Edinburgh at one time or another. I've driven, I've walked, there's been no problem walking anywhere. I used to even wheel a wheelbarrow and deliver things to the poets and the authors, you know, of Whiskey Galore or whatever, as a 14-year-old. I've run businesses in the centre, and I know tons of people who still try and run businesses in the centre and are panicking about George Street, because that's vital that transport remains in George Street for a number of things. If Scott wants a sofa delivered to his house, I bet he gets it, and it comes in through the front door. He's got a garage.
So,
I need a car.
Can we move to the question?
And the question is, why should Scott think that the plebs in the town who have lived here all their lives should give up our cars when he has one in his garage, and there is no air problem in Edinburgh?
We'll stop that just there. Scott, a very brief answer, please.
So I have to admit, I've never had my car in my garage. It's full of the same junk that's been there for a long time, I'm afraid. When we moved house from the last house, we did put the car in the garage just as we left, just so we could say we'd done it once. But what we'd say is that, you know, everybody uses transport differently in the city, and one of the challenges is transport's about habits. People tend to get themselves in a habit with transport. And so all we're saying about this transition, and that was what the first slide said, it's a transition we're going to go through up to 2030, is if you drive just now, if you're driving, you know, 10 trips a month, 100 trips a month, what we're saying is that for some people, or for, on average, all of us, we want to reduce the number of car trips we're making by 30%. And for you, sir, but for some people, that might not be possible because they've got a... Can I finish, please? So for some people, that might not be possible because they've got a disability or because it's related to their business, etc. But for other people, it is. So it's just about, I mean, I've got a car. I mean, my wife and I, we share a car, largely because of her work, but I use it as well, I have to say. So all this means for me is I've got to try and use the car a little bit less. It's not about throwing my keys away. It's about using it a little bit less. And actually, I think I'm right in saying the research shows for Edinburgh, most people that cycle also own a car.
All right, we're going to stop there.
Most people get it.
We've got several more hands, and we've literally got 1 minute. So, and we have had slightly more men ask questions than women. So I'm going to come. I'm afraid. I'm sorry, chaps. Rosanna in the middle there. Last question. So again, if you could be brief, that would be appreciated.
I'll be brief. It's Rosanna, very specific. Why are you considering putting a tram extension along the national cycle route number 1 at Roseburn? It doesn't make any sense at all to me.
Super concise, thank you. Scott, and then I think maybe Phil, just to finish.
So, I mean, this is quite a contentious subject, actually, because there's two routes to get to Granton, and one of them is the one which was established some time ago, and I think was approved, is that the right word, by Parliament back when the original scheme went live. So that's kind of, and for a lot of people that's the default, but there is other route. So what we're committed to doing, of course, is looking at the business case. So we'll look at, and I'm saying this, you know, I want to play this straight, actually, because in the draft public transport action plan, there was a preferred route and an alternative. But I said, no, this should be subject to public consultation, and we have to get the business case together for it. So we'll look at the business case of both routes. The problem with routing it down the cycle lane, to my mind, is a significant part of it. It's in a cutting. There's not a lot of space. The space issues, we put the space issue aside. Being in a cutting, there's accessibility issues, and there's also security issues because of lighting. Maybe both of them could be solved, but that comes at a cost. Whereas you put it through at street level, the line's much more accessible in all sorts of ways. So it is about looking at the costs and benefits of both. But what I would say is, no matter where it goes, there still will be high quality cycle route through. There it's a shared route, of course. But slightly rambling answer. That national cycle route isn't what we aspire to anymore. You have to be honest, because we're not about putting cyclists and pedestrians down dark, poorly lit lanes. They have to be in much safer places, etc. So that is a concern as well for that route. But we'll get through this, and there will be a cost-benefit analysis done on both routes. Hopefully that will get published, and it'll be in the public domain, and we can make a decision based on the evidence. So, but I absolutely understand the concerns.
Phil, would you like to add anything on Roseburn?
I don't think there's really anything for me to add to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
In that case, I'm just turning my own microphone off. Thank you all for coming, and I'm sorry you don't feel welcome. You are very welcome here, and we do actually value alternative voices and different perspectives, and I hope people do feel they're able to come and ask difficult questions and perhaps hold different views. It just falls to me to thank you all so much for coming out on this lovely evening, and perhaps to just say one or two things to draw this to a close. There is an opportunity for all of us, whatever our views, to let Scott and Phil and his colleagues know there's a consultation that's happening, and I would encourage everyone to have a look at those action plans and come to their own perspectives and decide what they want to say to the council in response. So there are some observations about it from Spoke's perspective on the Spoke's website and in the newsletter. So if you're interested in Spoke's perspective, you can find out what Spoke's thinks. And I think I just want to go back to some of the things that Adrian has said and where we started. There is a big challenge ahead. Climate change is real, it's here, and it's coming at us very quickly. So I think we should all be very conscious of the speed that things need to move. And clearly some of the history about implementation in Edinburgh has not moved as quickly as we would hope. There has been some very good work that has been done over the years to lay the foundations to make it much easier to move more quickly in the future, but still the challenges remain. And I think Adrian reminded us about children, and we have got, again, some good schemes around children in the city, making it easier for them to walk and wheel and cycle to school safely. But not all children and not all schools have that. And I think those points Irene Buterman made about inequalities and deprivation, which also came through our conversation, also important for all of us to think about. So I'm going to leave it all there. Thank you all very much. Thank you to Martin and all the crew that set things up and handled all the tech. It was flawless, right? Flawless. Thank you.
I'd just like to say a big thank you to Caroline for running the event so well for us. And thanks again to all the speakers, and thanks to everybody for coming. We do have to be out of the building fairly soon, but there is a chance to have a chat with people, say over the next 10 or 15 minutes. But after that, we need to ask you to leave. Thank you.